A secret hidden in the river. Imagine walking beside a quiet river in the wild lands of California. The year is 1848. The forest is silent except for the sound of flowing water and distant birds. Nothing looks unusual. No crowds, no cities, no chaos. Just a calm river moving slowly between the rocks. But beneath that peaceful water, something is waiting. Something powerful enough to change the lives of thousands of people. Something dangerous enough to create one of the biggest migrations in American history. Because hidden in that river was gold. And when one man accidentally discovered it, he unknowingly started a chain reaction that would pull people from every corner of the world. Men would abandon their homes. Ships would cross oceans filled with dreamers. Entire cities would rise almost overnight. But the strange truth about the gold rush is this: most of the people who came searching for gold never found it. Instead, they found hardship, danger, and a dream that slowly slipped away. This is the story of how a single shining stone changed California forever. The Quiet Settlement. Before the gold rush, California looked very different. Most of the land was still wild. Small settlements were scattered across valleys and forests. Life was simple but difficult. Among the settlers was a carpenter named James W. Marshall. Marshall worked for a landowner named John Sutter. Sutter had built a small settlement and planned to expand his business by building a sawmill. The sawmill stood beside the American River at a place known as Sutter's Mill. Workers were busy cutting wood and constructing buildings. No one there believed they were standing on one of the richest pieces of land in the world. They were simply trying to survive and build a new life. But one quiet morning changed everything. The discovery. On January 24, 1848, Marshall walked along the edge of the river. He was checking the water channel that powered the sawmill. As he stepped through the shallow water, something bright caught his attention. A tiny object shimmered between the stones. At first, it looked like a small yellow pebble, but when sunlight hit it, the metal flashed brightly. Marshall bent down and picked it up. The object felt heavy in his hand. Curious, he rubbed it against a rock. The shine did not disappear. His heart started beating faster. He had seen gold before, and this looked exactly the same. Still unsure, he placed the object in his pocket. He needed proof, because if this really was gold, the discovery could change everything. The test. Later that day, Marshall showed the metal to John Sutter. Sutter stared at the small yellow piece with disbelief. Gold? In our river? It seemed impossible. But they decided to test it. They hammered the metal. It bent instead of breaking. They boiled it in acid. The bright color remained unchanged. Slowly, the truth became impossible to deny. It was real gold. And if there was one piece in the river, there were probably many more. For a moment, both men stood silently. They realized what this discovery could mean. Gold could bring wealth, but it could also bring chaos. A secret they tried to keep. Sutter understood the danger immediately. If word spread about gold, thousands of people might rush to the area. His workers might abandon the sawmill. His land could be taken over by strangers searching for treasure. So he made a decision. The discovery had to remain secret. Only a few trusted workers were told. Everyone else continued working as if nothing had happened. But secrets involving gold rarely stay hidden, especially when curious eyes start searching the riverbanks. And soon, whispers began to travel beyond the quiet settlement. The first whisper of gold. At first, the rumors were small. Travelers spoke about strange stories, stories of men finding shiny metal in California rivers. Most people laughed. It sounded like a wild frontier myth. But then, something unexpected happened. Miners started showing tiny flakes of gold as proof. Merchants saw customers paying with gold dust. Suddenly, the rumors became impossible to ignore. Something extraordinary had been discovered in California, and the news was about to spread across the entire world. The storm that was coming. Within months, newspapers began reporting the discovery. The reaction was immediate. People everywhere started talking about California, a place where gold could be picked from rivers, a place where ordinary men might become rich overnight. The dream was irresistible. But what those dreamers didn't realize was that the journey to California would only be the beginning. Because the true story of the gold rush was not just about gold, it was about ambition, risk, and the powerful human desire to chase fortune. And soon, thousands of people would risk everything to reach the rivers of California. Some would become legends, many would lose everything, and the quiet land that once held a simple sawmill would soon become the center of the greatest gold rush in history. The rumor that would not stay quiet. At first, the discovery of gold near Sutter's mill was supposed to remain a secret. Only a handful of workers knew about it. They quietly searched the riverbanks during their free time, hoping to find small pieces of the yellow metal. For a short while, the secret held. But gold has a strange way of revealing itself. A worker might accidentally show a gold nugget in a nearby town. Another traveler might notice someone paying with gold dust instead of coins. And slowly, whispers began to spread across California. Gold has been found in the rivers. Men are pulling gold from the sand. At Sutter's mill, the ground itself shines with treasure. At first, many people dismissed the stories. Frontier lands were full of strange rumors. But soon the whispers grew louder, and the truth could no longer be hidden. The news reaches the world. In late 1848, newspapers finally confirmed the discovery. Suddenly, the quiet frontier of California became the most exciting place on Earth. News of gold spread rapidly through the United States. Within weeks, the rumor crossed oceans and reached Europe, South America, and Asia. People everywhere began dreaming about California, a distant land where rivers might hold enough gold to make anyone rich. The promise was irresistible. A farmer struggling to survive on dry land could suddenly imagine a new life. A sailor, tired of endless voyages, could dream of fortune waiting in the mountains. A poor worker could believe that one lucky day might change everything. The dream of gold began to pull people toward California like a powerful magnet. The birth of the dreamers. By 1849, thousands of people had already decided to leave their homes and travel west. These fortune seekers became known as the 49ers. They came from every background imaginable. Farmers from the American Midwest, merchants from busy eastern cities, miners from Mexico and South America, adventurers from Europe. Even travelers from China began preparing long journeys across the Pacific Ocean. Each person carried the same dream: gold. Gold that could change their lives forever. But reaching California was not easy. In fact, the journey itself became one of the most dangerous adventures of the 19th century. The long journey west. Travelers had three main ways to reach California. Each path was difficult. The first route was by land. Wagon trains crossed thousands of miles of wilderness. Families and groups of men traveled through deserts, rivers, and mountains. The journey could take 4 to 6 months. Along the way, travelers faced extreme heat,
lack of food, and deadly diseases. Some wagons broke down in the middle of the desert. Some travelers never survived the journey. Yet the dream of gold pushed people forward. They believed the reward would be worth the risk. The dangerous sea route. Another route was by sea. Ships sailed from the eastern United States around the south tip of South America. This journey could take 5 months or longer. Storms often battered the ships. Food sometimes ran low. Sailors grew exhausted from the endless ocean voyage. But when those ships finally reached California, passengers rushed to the shore with excitement. They believed they had finally reached the land of gold. Many of them would soon discover how wrong they were. A shortcut through the jungle. The third route was through Central America. Travelers sailed to Panama, crossed the jungle on foot or mule, and then boarded another ship to California. This path was shorter but extremely dangerous. The tropical forests were filled with disease. Mosquitoes spread deadly fevers. Travelers struggled through mud, rain, and thick jungle heat. Some never made it out alive. Yet thousands still chose this route because the promise of gold was stronger than fear. The first sight of California. When fortune seekers finally arrived in California, many felt a surge of excitement. They had traveled thousands of miles. They had survived storms, deserts, and disease. Now they believed their dreams were finally within reach. But the California they saw was not the paradise they imagined. The land was rough and chaotic. Mining camps had appeared almost overnight. Thousands of men crowded along the rivers. Everyone was digging, washing, and searching for gold. The peaceful land that once held only a small sawmill had transformed into a noisy frontier of ambition. The beginning of chaos. Soon the rivers became crowded with miners. Men stood shoulder to shoulder in cold water, shaking pans filled with sand and gravel. Every time a small piece of gold appeared, excitement spread through the camp. But for every lucky miner who found gold, dozens found nothing. Days turned into weeks, weeks turned into months. The dream of easy wealth slowly faded. Many miners realized that gold was far harder to find than the rumors suggested. Yet even as disappointment grew, more people continued arriving. The gold rush had become unstoppable, and the real struggle for survival in the mining camps was only beginning. The storm still growing. By the end of 1849, California was overflowing with fortune seekers. Ships filled the harbors. Tents covered the hillsides. New towns appeared almost overnight. The gold rush had transformed the land forever. But the greatest challenges were still ahead, because the next chapter of the gold rush would reveal a harsh truth. Finding gold was not the hardest part. Surviving the world that grew around it.
A land transformed. By the end of 1849, California no longer looked like the quiet frontier it once was. Only a year earlier, the rivers near Sutter's mill had flowed peacefully through forests and open valleys. Now those same rivers were crowded with thousands of miners. Tents stretched across the hills. Smoke rose from campfires. The sound of shovels, picks, and metal pans echoed day and night. Everywhere men were digging. Everywhere men were searching. Because everyone believed the same thing. Somewhere in the earth beneath their feet, gold was waiting. The daily hunt for gold. Each morning began before sunrise. Miners woke to the cold air of the mountains. They grabbed their tools and rushed to the rivers before anyone else could claim the best spots. The simplest tool was a small metal pan.
Miners filled it with sand and gravel from the riverbed. Then they gently shook it underwater. The lighter sand washed away. If they were lucky, tiny pieces of gold remained at the bottom of the pan. This process was slow and exhausting. A miner might spend an entire day searching and find nothing more than a few tiny flakes. But sometimes, just sometimes, a bright yellow nugget would appear. And in that moment, hope would return. A life of hardship. Life in the mining camps was far from comfortable. There were no proper houses. Most miners lived in tents or rough wooden shelters. Food was expensive and often scarce. A simple meal could cost many times more than it did in other parts of the country. Fresh vegetables were rare. Clean water was not always available. Many miners became sick from poor living conditions. Winter brought freezing temperatures. Summer brought unbearable heat. And through it all, the miners continued digging because the dream of gold refused to disappear. A world without rules. As more people arrived, the mining camps grew crowded and chaotic. There were very few laws in these remote areas, no strong police force, no organized government. Disputes over gold claims became common. Two miners might fight over the same patch of river. Arguments often turned violent. Sometimes guns were drawn. Sometimes men disappeared without explanation. Justice in the mining camps was unpredictable. Miners often created their own rules. Groups gathered together to settle disputes, but fairness was not always guaranteed. In a world where gold was everything, greed often ruled. The lucky few. Despite the hardships, stories of sudden wealth spread quickly. Occasionally, a miner would strike a rich deposit. One lucky discovery could produce enough gold to change a man's life forever. When that happened, the news traveled like lightning through the camps. Hundreds of miners would rush to the same location, hoping to find similar treasure. But those rich discoveries were rare. For every miner who became wealthy, hundreds remained poor. Still, hope was powerful, and hope kept the miners searching. The people who really got rich. Ironically, many of the richest people in California were not the miners, they were the merchants. Shop owners sold tools, clothing, and supplies to miners. Blacksmiths repaired equipment. Restaurant owners sold meals at high prices. Because miners were desperate for supplies, they paid almost anything. One famous example was Levi Strauss. He arrived in California during the gold rush. Instead of digging for gold, he sold durable pants to miners. Those strong pants later became known as blue jeans, and they made him far richer than most miners ever became. The growing frontier city. While miners crowded the rivers, cities were growing rapidly. One place changed faster than anywhere else, the small coastal town of San Francisco. Before the gold rush, San Francisco was just a tiny settlement, but within a few years it became one of the busiest cities in America. Ships filled the harbor, merchants opened shops and hotels, saloons and gambling halls appeared on every street. The city was full of excitement and opportunity, but it was also full of crime and chaos. The price of the dream. As months passed, many miners began to realize a painful truth. The dream of easy gold was mostly an illusion. Most miners worked endlessly and earned very little. Some spent years searching without success. Others lost their savings chasing the dream. Still, they continued digging, because once a man had traveled thousands of miles for gold, it was hard to admit defeat. And so the camps remained full of hopeful miners, each believing that tomorrow might finally bring the discovery they had been waiting for. A rush that could not be stopped. Even as disappointment spread through the camps, more people continued arriving. New ships reached California every week. New wagon trains crossed the mountains. The gold rush had become something much bigger than a simple treasure hunt. It had become a movement, a powerful wave of ambition sweeping across the world. But the rush was beginning to create deeper consequences. The land itself was changing. Entire rivers were being reshaped. Forests were disappearing. And the people who had lived on this land for generations were beginning to face a new and dangerous reality. The next chapter. The miners believed they were chasing fortune, but the gold rush was already leaving a deeper mark on California, a mark that would affect the land, the people, and the future of the entire region. Because the story of gold was no longer just about miners, it was becoming a story about power, expansion, and the transformation of a wild frontier into a new American state. And the greatest changes were still yet to come.
A frontier into a city. In just a few short years, California was changing faster than anyone could have imagined. The quiet rivers where miners once worked alone were now crowded with thousands of fortune seekers. But the most dramatic transformation was happening far from the rivers. It was happening in a small coastal settlement called San Francisco. Before the discovery of gold, San Francisco was little more than a sleepy town. A few wooden buildings stood near the harbor. Fishing boats drifted in and out of the bay. Life moved slowly. But after the discovery of gold near Sutter's mill, everything changed. Within months, ships began arriving from every direction, and with those ships came thousands of people. The harbor filled with abandoned ships. By 1849, the harbor of San Francisco had become one of the strangest sights in the world. Hundreds of ships crowded the bay, but something unusual had happened. Many of the sailors who arrived on those ships had abandoned them. The moment they heard about gold, they left their jobs and rushed toward the mining fields. Some ships were left floating in the harbor with no crew. Others were tied to the docks and forgotten. Some were even turned into hotels, warehouses, or restaurants. The harbor became a floating graveyard of abandoned vessels. It was the first sign of how powerful the dream of gold had become. A city built almost overnight. With thousands of people arriving every month, San Francisco began to grow at an incredible speed. New buildings appeared almost overnight. Carpenters worked day and night constructing houses, stores, and hotels. Tents covered entire hillsides. Streets that had once been empty were now filled with merchants, travelers, and miners. Food stalls sold meals to hungry workers. Blacksmiths repaired tools and equipment. Bankers opened offices to store gold dust safely. In just a few years, San Francisco had transformed into one of the busiest cities in America. But with rapid growth came serious problems. The rise of crime. Wherever gold appeared, crime soon followed. San Francisco quickly became a dangerous place. Thieves targeted miners carrying gold dust. Gambling houses and saloons attracted crowds looking to spend their newfound wealth. Arguments often turned into violent fights. Robberies became common in dark alleys. Because California was still a new territory, law enforcement was weak.
There were not enough police officers to control the rapidly growing population. As a result, many citizens took justice into their own hands. Groups known as vigilance committees formed to punish criminals. Sometimes these groups acted quickly and harshly, but their actions were not always fair. In the chaotic environment of the gold rush, justice could be unpredictable. The boom of business. While many miners struggled to find gold, business owners in San Francisco were becoming incredibly wealthy. Merchants sold tools, clothes, food, and equipment to miners heading for the gold fields. Prices were often extremely high. A simple shovel or pickaxe might cost several times its normal price. Food was also expensive. A single egg could cost as much as an entire meal in other parts of the country. But miners paid the price without complaint, because if they found gold, the cost of supplies would not matter. Smart businessmen quickly realized that selling supplies was often more profitable than mining for gold. One of those businessmen was Levi Strauss. Instead of searching for gold, Strauss sold durable clothing to miners. His strong denim pants became extremely popular among workers in the gold fields. That small business eventually grew into one of the most famous clothing companies in the world. A city of dreams and disappointment. San Francisco became a place filled with dreams. Everywhere you looked, people were talking about gold. Some miners returned from the mountains with pockets full of treasure. They spent their gold freely in the city. Gambling houses were filled with laughter and excitement. Restaurants served expensive meals to successful miners celebrating their luck. But for every man who returned rich, many others came back with nothing. Some miners had spent months searching without finding a single valuable nugget. Others had lost all their savings during the journey. The city was full of both fortune and failure, and sometimes the difference between the two was nothing more than luck. The new face of California. As the gold rush continued, California began to attract people from all over the world. Miners arrived from Europe, South America, and Asia. Different languages filled the streets. Different cultures met in the mining camps and cities. The population of California exploded in just a few years. What had once been a distant frontier was rapidly becoming one of the most important regions in the United States. In fact, the population grew so quickly that California soon became a state. In 1850, California officially joined the United States as the 31st state. The gold rush had not only created cities and fortunes, it had also changed the political future of the country. The shadow behind the gold. But beneath the excitement and growth, a darker story was unfolding. The land was being torn apart by mining. Rivers were clogged with mud and debris. Forests were cut down to supply wood for buildings and mines. And the native people who had lived on this land for centuries were being pushed aside. The gold rush was creating opportunity for some, but hardship for many others. And the consequences of that rush would shape California for generations. The rush continues. By the early 1850s, the gold rush had reached its peak. Thousands of miners were still searching the mountains and rivers. Cities like San Francisco continued growing rapidly. But the easy gold was beginning to disappear. The next stage of the gold rush would become even more difficult, because miners would soon realize that the simple methods they once used were no longer enough. To find more gold, they would need bigger tools, bigger companies, and much more dangerous mining techniques. And those changes would transform the gold rush forever. The end of easy gold. By the early 1850s, something had started to change in the gold fields of California. In the early days of the rush, miners could simply walk into a river with a pan and find small flakes of gold. Sometimes a lucky miner might even discover a large nugget resting among the stones. But those days were slowly disappearing. Thousands of miners had already searched the rivers and streams. The easiest gold had been taken. Now the land demanded something more difficult. Miners were digging deeper into the earth. They were climbing higher into the mountains, and many were beginning to realize a harsh truth. Finding gold was becoming harder every year. A new kind of mining. As the easy gold disappeared, miners began searching for new ways to reach the hidden deposits. Simple tools like pans and shovels were no longer enough. The gold was now buried deep inside hills and mountains. To reach it, miners needed stronger tools and better technology. Soon, large mining operations began to appear across California. Instead of individual miners working alone, groups of workers joined together. They built wooden channels to redirect rivers. They dug tunnels deep into rocky hillsides. The gold rush was no longer just a simple treasure hunt. It was becoming a powerful industry. The rise of hydraulic mining. One of the most dramatic innovations was a method called hydraulic mining. Miners used powerful streams of water to blast entire hillsides apart. Huge hoses sprayed water with enormous force. The water tore through dirt and rock, washing the soil into large channels. Inside those channels, miners placed wooden barriers to catch pieces of gold. The technique was incredibly effective. Hills that once took months to dig could now be destroyed in days. Huge amounts of gold were suddenly being uncovered, but this new method came with serious consequences. Mountains washed away. Hydraulic mining changed the landscape of California forever. Entire hills were blasted apart by powerful water streams. Valleys filled with mud and debris. Rivers became clogged with sediment from the mines. Farmland far downstream began to suffer. Floods became more common as rivers filled with mining waste. Some farmers complained that their land was being destroyed by the debris flowing from the mountains. But the gold rush was still in full force, and for many miners, the promise of gold was more important than the damage being done to the land. The rise of powerful mining companies. As mining became more complicated, large companies began to dominate the gold fields. Independent miners who once worked alone found it harder to compete. Big companies had more money. They could build expensive equipment. They could hire large groups of workers. They could dig deeper and process more soil than individual miners ever could. Slowly, the gold rush began to change. The age of lone prospectors was fading. In its place came organized mining operations. For many early miners, this was the end of their dream. They had come to California hoping to find gold with their own hands. Now they were being replaced by machines and large companies. The struggle of the small miner. For the independent miner, life became increasingly difficult. Some had already spent years searching the rivers. Some had found small amounts of gold, but not enough to become wealthy. Now the competition was growing stronger. Mining companies were claiming the most productive land. Equipment was becoming more expensive. Some miners decided to give up the search and return home. Others stayed and worked as laborers for mining companies. The dream of striking it rich was fading for many people, but the gold rush had already changed their lives forever. The cities continued to grow. While the mining camps faced new challenges, California's cities continued to expand. Places like San Francisco were growing into major economic centers. Merchants, bankers, and entrepreneurs built new businesses. Trade increased as ships carried gold and goods across the Pacific Ocean. California was quickly becoming one of the most important regions in the United States. The gold rush had transformed it from a distant frontier into a powerful new state. But not everyone benefited from these changes. The forgotten people of the gold rush. Long before miners arrived, The land of California had been home to many native communities. For generations, these people had lived along the rivers and forests. But the arrival of thousands of miners changed everything. Mining destroyed hunting grounds and fishing areas. Settlers took land that native families had lived on for centuries. Violence and disease spread quickly. Many native communities suffered greatly during the gold rush years. Their story was often ignored in the excitement of the gold rush. Yet it remains one of the most important and tragic parts of California's history. The rush begins to fade. By the late 1850s, the excitement of the gold rush had begun to slow. Gold was still being mined, but the easy riches were mostly gone. Many fortune seekers had already left California. Some returned home with money. Others returned with nothing. The dream that had once pulled thousands of people across oceans and deserts was fading. But the gold rush had already left a permanent mark on history. Cities had been built. Industries had grown. California had become a powerful state. And the world would never forget the moment when a single discovery in a quiet river changed everything. The next chapter. Even though the gold rush was slowing down, its legacy was only beginning. The people who stayed in California would continue building farms, businesses, and cities. Railroads would soon connect the region with the rest of the country. And the wealth created during the gold rush would help shape the future of the American West. But behind every city and every fortune, there remained the memory of a simple moment. A man standing beside a quiet river, a small piece of shining metal in his hand, and the beginning of the greatest gold rush the world had ever seen.
The end of an era. By the late 1850s, the golden excitement of California had begun to fade. The rivers and hills that once promised instant wealth were no longer filled with easy gold. Miners who had arrived years earlier realized the harsh truth. Fortune was rare, and the majority of seekers had found nothing but hardship. Yet thousands still remained, clinging to the hope of one last discovery. For others, the reality was clear. They needed to leave or risk losing everything they had. The miners move on. Many of the original miners, the brave 49ers, began returning home. Some went back east to their farms and families. Others traveled further west, chasing new discoveries in Oregon, Nevada, and even Alaska. Those who had managed to earn some wealth often invested it in businesses, farms, and city life instead of continuing the grueling search for gold. California, once a frontier of opportunity, was slowly transforming. The rush of thousands of hopeful miners was no longer the heartbeat of the region. It was becoming a memory. Ghost towns and abandoned camps. As miners left the gold fields, the camps they had built were abandoned almost overnight. Tents rotted in the sun. Wooden shacks fell apart from exposure and neglect. Rivers that had been crowded with miners became eerily quiet. Some towns that had sprung up near rich deposits vanished entirely. From the outside, it was as if the gold rush had never happened. But the scars on the land remained. Hillsides were scarred by hydraulic mining, rivers clogged with debris, and forests were cleared for timber and firewood. The land itself told the story of the frenzy that had once consumed California. The human toll. The decline of the gold rush revealed its human toll. Many miners had died from disease, exhaustion, or accidents. Families had been separated, relationships broken. The indigenous peoples of California suffered immensely.
Their lands had been taken, communities disrupted, and populations decimated. The rush for gold had created wealth and opportunity for some, but also sorrow and loss for countless others. It was a story of ambition, risk, and the consequences of chasing a dream too quickly. The cities remained. Even as the gold fields emptied, California's cities did not vanish. San Francisco, Sacramento, and other settlements that had grown during the rush continued to thrive. Merchants, bankers, and entrepreneurs had built infrastructure, established businesses, and created permanent communities. The wealth generated during the rush laid the foundation for the state's economy. Though the easy gold was gone, California had been transformed forever. Its cities became hubs of trade, culture, and innovation in the West. Lessons learned. The decline of the gold rush taught a hard lesson about greed, patience, and the power of hope. Many miners had come with dreams of instant wealth and adventure. Few found what they were looking for. But the gold rush also created opportunities beyond the individual quest for gold. New cities emerged, businesses flourished, technology and innovation accelerated. California became a key part of the United States. The story of gold was never just about treasure. It was about how people, ideas, and economies are transformed by ambition. A lasting legacy. Even decades later, the echoes of the gold rush remained. Railroads connected the West to the rest of the country. Entrepreneurs built lasting industries. Immigrants who had arrived for gold stayed to create families, businesses, and communities. And the legend of the gold rush inspired future generations, a symbol of hope, risk, and the enduring human desire to chase a dream. The rivers, hills, and valleys of California would forever carry the memory of those frantic years when the world came rushing to a single river for the promise of gold. Closing reflection. The gold rush may have ended, but its story is timeless. It is a story of hope and despair, of wealth and loss, of adventure and transformation. One small discovery, a glimmering piece of gold in a quiet river, had changed the course of history. It reshaped a land, transformed lives, and created a legend that will never be forgotten. California had been born in gold, and its heartbeat still echoes in every corner of the state. Beyond the rush. As the golden frenzy faded in the 1850s, a new chapter began in California's story. The rivers emptied of eager miners, and the chaotic camps slowly became silent. But some people did not leave. They stayed, not to chase gold, but to build a future. They saw California not as a temporary playground for fortune seekers, but as a land of opportunity, where hard work and persistence could create lasting success. These were the settlers, entrepreneurs, and dreamers who would transform the gold rush into a foundation for a permanent society. The settlers who remained. Many of the miners who stayed realized that survival in California required more than luck. It required planning. Some began farming the fertile valleys once abandoned in the rush for gold. They planted orchards, vineyards, and fields of wheat. The Central Valley, once a quiet wilderness, slowly turned into the breadbasket of the state. Others settled near the coast, creating towns and trade routes that connected the interior with ports like San Francisco. These settlers laid the groundwork for the communities that continue to thrive today. Entrepreneurs and merchants. California's boom was not only physical, it was economic. Merchants who had supplied miners during the gold rush realized that their businesses could grow even further. Shopkeepers, blacksmiths, innkeepers, and shipping agents expanded their operations. One notable example was Levi Strauss, who turned his supply business into a lasting company. Banks and trading houses flourished. Gold that had been mined now fueled commerce, investments, and city development. The rush had created a new class of business leaders, men and women who saw beyond instant wealth and built lasting enterprises. Immigrants who made California their home. The gold rush had drawn people from all over the world. Chinese immigrants, arriving by the thousands, initially worked in mining and railroad construction. Many stayed, opening shops, restaurants, and cultural centers. European immigrants from Ireland, Germany, and Italy also remained, contributing to California's diverse communities. Even some Latin American settlers who had traveled north for gold stayed and enriched the culture of the region. The state became a tapestry of languages, traditions, and skills, all blending into a unique society that would define California for generations. Education, culture, and governance. With the end of the rush, people began building schools, churches, and government institutions. The chaos of the gold camps gave way to structured communities. San Francisco and Sacramento became centers of law, education, and governance. By 1850, California was officially admitted as the 31st state of the United States. The rush for gold had accelerated not only economic growth, but political development. A once remote frontier was now a fully functioning state with permanent institutions, roads, and governance systems. Technology and infrastructure. The gold rush had introduced new technology to California. Hydraulic mining, water channels, and large-scale equipment had changed the landscape. Even after the rush, these innovations continued to influence agriculture, construction, and urban development. Railroads began connecting California's cities to the rest of the country. Telegraphs spread information faster than ever before. The infrastructure built to support the gold rush became the backbone of California's modern economy. Lessons from the people who stayed. The miners who left had sought instant wealth. Those who remained discovered that long-term success required vision, effort, and adaptability. They understood that California's value was not just in the gold beneath its rivers, but in its fertile lands, strategic ports, and growing communities. By investing in cities, farms, businesses, and social institutions, they created the foundation for California's future prosperity. In essence, they turned the dream of gold into the reality of growth. A land forever changed. The gold rush may have faded, but its legacy lived on. California was no longer a frontier. It had become a land of opportunity, industry, and culture. The rivers, once crowded with pan-hungry miners, flowed quietly again. The cities that rose during the rush had endured. The settlers, entrepreneurs, and immigrants who stayed ensured that California would continue to thrive long after the last nugget was found. And even today, the echoes of the gold rush shape the state's economy, diversity, and identity. Closing thought. The gold rush was more than a hunt for treasure. It was a catalyst for transformation. It brought people from across the world. It created wealth, hardship, and innovation. And it left behind a California that would forever carry the spirit of ambition, resilience, and dreams of prosperity. From the first glimmer in Sutter's mill to the thriving cities and fertile valleys, the gold rush reshaped lives, landscapes, and history itself.